The APEST acronym stands for Apostolic, Prophetic, Evangelist, Shepherd, and Teacher, made most popular by the 5Q Network and Alan Hirsch, taking from Ephesians 4, the understanding that to truly represent Christ in the world, we need these 5 giftings to be present in both the leadership of any organization that touts that it is following Jesus Christ. As such, we at the center have made a decision that our leadership team would be made up of APEST individuals, and that those 5 individuals would be the visionary missionaries for the center. And some will ask, well, how does that work together? Well, you can look at that in more detail on the APEX structure and organizational video that is available on this website. But today I'd like to explain to you a little bit about APEST, about each one of these selective giftings or leadership roles. First, apostolic, or the A. This term, apostle, literally means sent one. Apostles extend the gospel. They are the sent ones. They ensure the faith is transmitted from one context to another and from one generation to the next. They're always thinking about the future, establishing the church in new contexts, looking for ways in which to extend the kingdom and the rule and reign of Jesus Christ. If you fully focus on just initiating new ideas and rapid expansion, sometimes you can leave people behind and organizations can be wounded. The shepherding and teaching functions obviously play off well with this gifting as well as role within any organization. You need apostles. And in fact, you need all 5 of the giftings if you are going to lead well. The second gifting and initial, P, stands for the prophet or prophetic. Now, we need to guard against the loose way in which this term has been used in the past. We are not talking about a prophet who sees the future, listens to God, and then hands it off to other individuals. While there is something to be said for prophets being able to assess and see the results of ideas, the real role within the prophet in this understanding is the person who is passionately concerned with living a life that is morally consistent with the covenant of God, a simple and authentic life of justice, holiness, and righteousness. The prophets in this APEST arrangement are the ones who are looking for God's will. They are particularly attuned to God and His truth for today. They often bring correction and challenge to the dominant assumptions, and they look for ways in which to challenge the ideas of what is to what should be. They insist, above all else, that the community obey what God has commanded. They always question the status quo. And with the other leaders in place, prophets can sometimes become, belligerent activists. Sometimes they disengage and say the others aren't fully focused on God. The hope is that the prophetic will look to both the apostolic for ways in which they see God at work, or the evangelist or the shepherd to help reel them in. The third letter in our acronym, E, stands for evangelist. The evangelist's role is to proclaim the good news, both in word and deed. And they are the keepers that this needs to be the core message of any missional expression or church. The evangelist is the storyteller and all-important recruiter to the cause. They are the naturally infectious person who is able to enlist other people into what God is doing and how he is working through a group of individuals we often call the church. Evangelists recruit. They are infectious. They recruit others to the cause. They believe they have a personal need or a personal calling to bring others into God's redemption in Christ. And they draw people into the wider vision of what the church is. Sometimes they can be overly focused on the individual or the sharing of the gospel and fail to mature and strengthen those that they've now brought into the realm of Christ. Hence the reason they need the shepherds and the teachers. That leads us to the S, shepherds. Shepherds' function is to maintain and develop a healthy community and enriching relationships. Their commitment is to nurture spiritual maturity, maintain communal health, and to develop a community that is strong enough to get past the breakdowns that naturally happen within humanity to create a loving community among the redeemed family. Shepherds nurture and protect. They are caregivers of the community, and they focus on the protection and maturity of God's flock. Shepherds can value stability to the detriment of the mission. The people, they say, are more important than the mission. And while that may be true, there are times when the mission is most directed by God. Sometimes they can foster an unhealthy dependence on the church because they just want everyone to stay within the walls. And hence the reason they need the evangelist and the prophet and the apostolic to move them forward. And finally, the T, the teacher. The teacher is the guiding and discerning function. In the biblical tradition, the emphasis falls on wisdom and not simply on speculative philosophy. Teaching involves integrating the intellectual and the spiritual and helping to pass it on to the current generation as well as the successive generations. Teachers understand and explain. They are communicators of God's truth and wisdom, and they help others to remain biblically grounded, to better discern God's will, to guide them towards wisdom, and to help the community remain faithful to Christ's word. Without their input, sometimes without the input of the other roles, sometimes teachers can fall into dogmatism or dry intellectualism. Or, to put it another way, they can become modern-day Pharisees that put the rules above the people or above the mission. Hence, they are called to be in relationship with the apostles, the prophets, the teachers, and the shepherds to ensure we continue to mature the faith and, as Jesus commanded, right, training up his disciples. Now, it's interesting to note that in the church today, we have seen shepherds and teachers take over, and the apostolic, the prophetic, and the evangelists have moved on to other areas. We don't believe that's best for the kingdom. And in fact, we believe that is one of the reasons many churches today are declining in membership as well as in maturity. They fail in representing all five of the giftings.